Hey everybody, welcome to episode 23 of How to Build a Game Studio. I am Trevor Oz, and today we have a great interview with Jing Wang. She goes on a journey through her career from someone who wasn't even really allowed to play video games growing up to being entrenched in video games. It's a really awesome conversation. She talks about her time working for Golan, who did marketing directly for Nintendo. That's a lot of fun. Into forming Box School Inc. And them getting purchased by Phoenix Labs. It was an absolute pleasure to do this interview, and I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did actually conducting it. So yeah, check it out. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of How to Build a Game Studio. I am Trevor Oz, and today I am joined by Jing Wang. She is a founder for Bot School Inc., who just got purchased by Phoenix Labs. How are you today, Jing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So we know what you're doing now, or at least partially now that you've been acquired, and I'm sure very busy because of it.
Yeah, it's been a really wild ride the last year, and it's been a busy few months since me and the rest of the team joined with the rest of the crew over at Phoenix Labs. We're 100% working on Dauntless now, so that's been super exciting, and yeah, it's been a busy few months.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a little bit of a transition, but it's awesome to hear because Dauntless I haven't. It's one of those games that I haven't checked out yet, but I've wanted to and just haven't had the chance. But
It's a lot of fun. I played quite a bit, and it's great to be able to work on a game that you like. And I've had that privilege over and over again in my career, so it's nice to be able to continue that trend.
yeah, it's always great to work on stuff that you like and are into, which is why I'm glad that we're at our studio. We're working on tactical RPG because we're all kind of into that thing. Um,
Yeah.
so it's a lot of fun to do that. But let's go back a little bit. Um, did you think that you were going to be in video games?
Oh, nope. I I did not. My journey into and through games has been super unexpected, and it was not planned for, but I'm so glad it happened. I was definitely not allowed to play games as a kid. I still got some in there because I think there's a game that I played as a kid, Sim Tower, which I don't know if
Okay,
you're familiar with.
I know
It's
what it is, but I never played it.
it's basically a glorified elevator management game, but I loved it to death. That was one of the few games I convinced my parents were was good for me because it taught me how to manage a building and a business, and therefore had other wider applications. But beyond that, I really wasn't allowed to play very many games growing up. And then a couple of years into my career, so basically, I actually started off in a marketing agency, working on travel tourism and working on some campaigns for the Los Angeles Department of Public Works. So very, very not gaming related.
Yeah, I would
And
say.
yeah, and that was back in 2006, 2007, and I just happened at this agency. I happened to work on a 3 month long campaign for the launch of a game, helping another agency out. And I think there was just something about that account, even though it was a really short stint, and it was not a game that I normally played. Just meeting the people who are in the industry and feeling the energy of it, and uh, games have this unique position where it's part technology and part creativity and art, and so the intersection of those two things really just resonated with me, um, and yeah, that account led to meeting a lot of people inside games, and then when there were more opportunities to work on uh, game titles and helping to launch some of those games. um, a few years later, I just jumped right in. So Yeah, it's been like a little bit over a decade now that I've been in games. So
Yeah, it's a long time. So before you made the jump over, and you're doing this work at a marketing agency, where were you at this point in your adulthood? Have you latched onto games at all?
I played games with my friends. Like,
Mm,
I played a really random mix of games. Uh, a lot of Burnout 360. I
nice.
don't play other racing games, but that one I was super into. A lot of my friends and I would have weekly rock band sessions and Guitar Hero. I was really bad at a lot of games like the shooters that are out there,
Hmm.
but I watched. I had a lot of friends who play those, so I basically was a good backseat driver of the way they would play those games. So watched many hours of Halo, watched many hours of Dota. Not a shooter game, but like more games that I spent time with friends as they were playing them, even though I wasn't playing them myself. And then I liked puzzle games, and so like a lot of Professor Layton and games of that ilk.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, Professor Layton's always a good choice. You can't go wrong there. So you go from you jump into games. Where do you start your game journey at?
So really beyond that first small launch, that was a really quick stint, 3-month launch campaign for a game called Freestyle Street Basketball, which was an MMO RPG for street basketball. Like I said, not a game I played before, not a category I played before, but the first real kind of project that I immersed myself into was when I joined the Golan Harris team, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with Golan Harris. They're a very large PR agency, and they've been working with Nintendo of America for, I think at this point, like 30 plus years.
Oh wow.
And and so because of the longstanding relationship between the two, between the agency and NOA, we had a dedicated team of about 30 people or so that all we did was we worked on various first party, games and hardware launches with Nintendo. And so got to work with Nintendo as my first
Yeah,
venture, like real
that's.
venture into games, and they were awesome. It was really cool.
I was gonna say that's quite the jump. I would say most people that get into video games would love to work for Nintendo at some point because most of us grew up with Nintendo. So
Yeah.
the fact that your first uh, actual games job ends up doing stuff for Nintendo is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and I played my fair share of Mario and Zelda games growing up, and obviously had exposure to things like Pokemon. Not a crazy deep player of any of those because we didn't have a console at home, but that's what I would always play when I go over to friends' houses. But uh, Nintendo has just like a very special place in a lot of people's hearts, and it was a real treat to be able to work with them.
Yeah, I can imagine. So your time at Nintendo at Golan working on the Nintendo accounts, what's what's the biggest takeaway that you learned while you were there?
That's a good question. I mean, I learned I learned a lot about the meaning that games have in players' lives. And I mean, I got to see this a ton with, for instance, I worked on the uh, one of the latest Golden Sun game, and it had
Mm-hmm.
been 14 years in between two of the games. And in those 14 years, even though there was no other development that was, being shown out to the world, there were still fan clubs and forums and fan art, like these fan communities that were keeping alive and like keeping the thread of conversation going and developing the culture around that game. That when we were looking to launch that long-awaited Golden Sun game, they were like, "Yes, give it to us! This is amazing." And so just like that was a moment for me. Another moment was we worked. So one of the campaigns I worked on was the 25th anniversary of Super Mario Brothers, and for that we did a surprise visit from Miyamoto-san at the Nintendo World Store. and just kind of being on the floor and experiencing it with all these diehard fans, like watching their reaction when first Mario came out, and then Reggie Fils-Aimé came out, and the crowd flipped out over that. And then when he revealed that the surprise guest was Miyamoto-san, and I saw just like families and these deep, hardcore fans of everything that Nintendo has done just like burst out into tears, and you just felt the energy in the room. So being able to work in a space in which people are that passionate about the products and the experiences that you're able to help deliver for them, it's like that's what made me fall in love with working in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine having one of those moments too. That's kind of crazy to be a fly on the wall essentially in that moment. Seeing a lot of people get to see these characters and these people that make such great games that they grew up with. They have these memories from when they were kids. They have memories they made with friends or parents or anybody else in between, that sort of thing. So
Yeah, and some of them actually, there was a family that I talked to who for one of the other campaigns I worked on was the launch of Pokemon Black White.
mm-hmm.
And the, for that, we had a family who was basically at the front of the line of this like insane line as they were waiting to become one of the first people in the U.S. to be able to purchase the game. And the story, I'll never forget this. Like the story they told me was how since Red Blue came to the States, they have always been in that line, and that's gone from the the mom and dad being young parents to their kids are now pretty fully grown, and they're still doing this together as a family tradition. That was really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those are the kind of moments that are really cool to hear about,
Yeah.
for sure. So transitioning from working for Golan and working on Nintendo, where did you go from there?
So I spent a couple years there, and then in 2011, I joined Riot Games. They make a game called League of Legends, and soon more games, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, it's really cool to see that they're putting out some more stuff because I knowing other people that have worked for Riot, I know that they've always worked on like side projects and stuff, but most of them never saw the light of day. So it's really cool to see them actually working on stuff that is finally coming out.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Riot, and I probably always will be. League of Legends is probably the game that turned me into a much more hardcore gamer. I've played League or Fight Tactics or some variation of things in the League universe, you know, regularly for the last 8 years, and some of my best friends and favorite teammates in the world still work there and are working on and leading some of those projects, and it's very exciting to be able to see some of that work start to make its way out into the world.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what they're doing, honestly. But going from there, how was the transition from you working for, not actually working for Nintendo, but working for a company that was working for Nintendo, to actually being embedded into the developer? How was that transition for you?
Yeah, the jump from being on the agency side into in-house was really interesting. I think, I learned a lot from my days in agency. It created, the pace of life at agency is a little bit different than in-house. Like each one has its trade-offs. One of the benefits of being at Golan was I got to focus entirely on Nintendo, so it wasn't like other, some of the things that you run into with marketing agencies is your attention is split across a few different brands with different kinds of products and very different industries. Whereas with Nintendo, we could focus, and we were working with a consistent group of people, and so we got to really understand their ethos and the way that they communicated with their audience. And it was, so in that sense, there wasn't a crazy huge jump. I think the thing that was really different about Riot was, Riot is a very modern company in a lot of ways, and it took a lot of cues from technology companies that I had not experienced before. So, a lot of what I've learned over the years in working there was hypothesis-driven thinking, structured thinking, iterative development, being highly agile in the way that you go about approaching work, and they support the game that's a live service, right? And so that's very different than a box product game. So it's not like, okay, now that you've shipped it, you're moving on to the next thing. You're thinking about, okay, once we're shipping a thing, and then after it's gone out into live, we're taking feedback and we're listening to players and we're seeing their behavior and their reaction to things. And then how does that incorporate into the next iteration that we make on this product or its related products, or the game overall, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was really cool. And also just being able to, I joined Riot when we were about 400 people or so. And within a year, we were like 2 or 3 times that. And so being part of a team that was growing at that particular scale was also really interesting. And I learned a lot from that experience. And I also think that the folks that I work with at Riot, they were the first place where I really felt like they deeply, deeply, deeply believed in putting players' experiences first above everything else, and being willing to put some conventions aside in order to do so. So the way that they interacted with their fan community, the way that they really propped up the fan community was something I hadn't seen before. And the way that they talked very directly with the community and wanted to make sure there was a two-way communication, that was also something that I hadn't experienced directly before. And it was a very different style, and it was really cool to be able to see. And so I think those were some of the key differences, at least what I saw initially.
So for you, for that two-way communication, was that part of what led you to be able to, part of the marketing strategy in a sense, to marketing like a live service game compared to just a game that just comes out and then it gets its big marketing push and then it's done?
Well, I think it's just a very different approach, right? I think for a long time, Riot's secret sauce was the ability to think, and the emphasis in thinking about things from a player's perspective, and how do you talk directly to the player. And so I didn't work on the game marketing side while I was over at Riot. I worked on our company branding, and at least that's where I started. And then I shifted to a few other things that had nothing to do with marketing. But had a very interesting meandering journey there. But I think the Riot, because of its emphasis on building that community much more from the ground up and speaking directly with the community, didn't do a lot of traditional advertising marketing practices. And the game and the audience grew exponentially, and they were very successful in being able to create that connection with players. And I think it's just like marketing and publishing a game is a tool like everything else. There are a number of different ways that there are a number of different kinds of situations in which one approach is going to be great for one situation and maybe not the right fit for something else. And for Riot, it shows early on, like, we're going to place the emphasis on building community and building the direct pathways of communication and gathering that feedback and doing much more word of mouth based type of marketing than putting ads out. And some of that is because of the fact that the game was continuously being worked on and iterated on. And so those two styles and those two techniques kind of dovetail nicely with one another. I do think that now you see many more companies have those direct conversations with their audiences, and I think that's a great trend in general.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now you see, I mean, obviously, there's a lot more live service games out there, but you also
Right.
see a lot of pretty much any time a patch comes out for one of those games, there's a stack of notes, a stack of, we received this feedback from you. It's a two-way street. It doesn't feel like developers are just doing things in a bubble anymore.
Yeah, and I also think that that's extending. I mean, slightly different styles, but with things like the rise of social media over the course of the last decade and some change, 2 decades maybe, and the popularity of things like Reddit and just the way that people are getting their information and how they're interacting with developers. It's changed the dynamic, and I generally am a big fan of how much some of those walls have come down. And so even for games that are not live service, it's much more expected now that you want to establish trust and have an authentic relationship with those audiences. And for me personally, from a marketing front, like I think that marketing and branding, when it's done well, really is about creating authentic connections between people, and everybody comes out of the situation just happier, better, more fulfilled.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So you started in branding at Riot.
Yeah.
And then you moved to other places. Where did you go from there?
So I wanted to continue to, the way that I've approached my career is a lot around breadth and depth and expanding my skill sets. And so a couple of years into my time working on brand, which was a really very cool thing that I got exposure to, I wanted to see if some of the product management and project skills that I built up on the marketing side could translate to some other areas too. And I just wanted to, like I said, keep acquiring more skills. And there was an opportunity that came up with helping with our very nascent startup merchandising team. And so essentially, I got to, there was a interesting year of crossover or so where I was both kind of marketing and also on the merchandising team. But basically, I moved over into merchandise, and from that team, I basically started off with leading our efforts around apparel, and then that expanded into a few other roles. Like eventually took on supporting our e-commerce team as well as our player support team, and that evolved into our broader channel team. And so my last 4 or 5 years or so at Riot were were kind of centered around the different things that I did on merch.
Okay, yeah, that's I would say that's definitely different.
Yeah, so it was a lot more business operations, product management, some web development management.
So what did you say that you learned the most from being in that position?
Oh my gosh, I learned
A lot.
I learned so many things. I learned a lot about what it takes to make physical products and get them shipped out to fulfillment centers around the world and out into players' hands. And it was so satisfying to be able to also see people wear and interact with and post about and share feedback about the physical products that were a real life manifestation of like a piece of their love for a game and a universe that they really loved. So that was super satisfying. And yeah, I just learned so many things. I don't even know how to begin. I could spend an hour talking about the things I learned from each and every single role there. one of the things is probably like making physical products is really complex.
Yeah.
It's very fun, but also very complex.
Yeah, that's something we're gonna have to that us as a studio at Winterborn are gonna have to delve into at some point. So, yeah, that'll be interesting trying to figure all that out for sure.
It's a lot of different kinds of trade-offs, and I think understanding starting from understanding what's the experience you want to be able to provide for your audience, for your players, and then working backwards from there. And Riot chose to build a team very differently than maybe other studios would have built it. It just really depends on what you're trying to accomplish at the end of the day. And I think what we were doing a lot of was we took on a lot of things in-house because League of Legends is a very complex universe, and we wanted to have the ability to make sure that we were going to create really high quality things and that we could continue to improve and iterate the way that we did things. And our hypothesis was that if we built some of this in-house expertise, it gives us more flexibility to be able to deliver on the things that will resonate the most with players. Now, that might not be the right choice for every single
Right.
IP out there, right? There are plenty of also really great partners that you can work with, a lot of different ways to be able to deliver interesting content to your players.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes sense in Riot's case to go in house, especially with how big their audience base is and what their audience expects from them. So
Yeah, and also just like the number, a very it's a very complex universe,
mm-hmm.
And some of the nuances there is like if you don't, even if you play the game,
yeah,
it would be hard to kind of figure out what parts of it are you going to articulate for what players in what way. There's just like so many different options and what you can go and what you can go on to build. And with physical products, like you have to make a choice on what you're going to invest in actually building out because the timelines are so long and the investment is very different than like making a digital product, right?
Right, yeah, and if you make the wrong choice, it ends up being something that doesn't sell. Um, yeah, there's a lot more risk, you could say, in doing a physical item like that. So going from there, um, your journey with Riot ends. What do you do next?
So I basically toward the beginning of 2018, so last year, I started talking with a buddy of mine who was also at Riot for a long time, someone that I'd known for 5-6 years, and I had a lot of trust in his capabilities and his integrity. His name's Chris Cobb. He's one of my co-founders from Bot School, and he had talked about how he had wanted to go on this entrepreneurial journey, and he and Ross Baker, another friend of his who he had worked with in the past at PopCap, and then they had come down and actually worked at Riot together before Ross moved back to Seattle and continued to work at PopCap. They had been talking about going and founding a company together that would focus on using games and all the things that we know about games and metagame systems to change the way that kids are introduced to computer science for the first time, or like introduced to coding basics for the very first time. And so initially, we were talking about it as more, I'm giving him feedback on some of the how to articulate the story, and he was just sharing with me. And then over the course of time, he's like, "Why don't you come and join us on this journey?" And so one thing kind of led to another. We did, we've known each other for many years, and so there was a lot of trust already built up there. And then in the middle of the year, the entrepreneurial journey was something that I had always wanted to go on. Both my parents are entrepreneurs, and so I knew that at some point I would do that experiment, and this felt like the right time and the right opportunity. It was really hard to leave my team at Riot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's but it was the right move for me, and it was something where I was like, I need to do this at some point, and I'm very glad that I wanted to go and do it. And we went and started on the journey together last July, last August, I should say. Yeah.
Okay, so
And that's how. And then from that point, I don't know if you want me to talk more about like what happened on the journey and so on and so forth, but
yeah. But so you make the jump. You decide to help start a company. Um, how are you feeling in that moment? I mean, it's a big risk, especially at something that's a big going from a big company, a Riot, to jumping and doing your own thing. How did you feel about that risk?
oh, it was terrifying, and it was exactly the right kind of terrifying. Um, I tend to believe that if I'm not a little bit scared about the jump, then it probably isn't going to be challenging enough.
Hmm.
And it was like the exciting kind of scary, and not the super scary kind of scary, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it was something where I think I described it this way to some of the folks I talked to on my old team. In a lot of ways, joining the merch team at Riot was a little bit like going skydiving with a tandem instructor strapped to you. There was a lot of big expectations, and it was complex, and it was new and exciting and hard and challenging. But ultimately, uh, we some of the things were just already there. Like, you knew who was going to be running payroll, and you knew who was going to be like housing your team and things like that, right? And like, you had to do the work of setting up the business and setting things off in the right direction. But some of there was a little bit of a safety net there, whereas this was like going in skydiving by yourself for the very first time, where there isn't a person strapped to your back who's going to help you out of the situation. You're kind of like going to have to figure your way out around it. And something about that was very exciting. And yeah, it was an experience I wanted to be able to explore, and to be able to do so with two co-founders who I had already a long set of experiences that told me that these are really high integrity people who are very capable. And we had a lot of shared context and shared experiences and shared language. So it just made everything a little bit easier as far as going and taking on this scary new adventure, right? Plus the area we were looking at making a difference in is close to all of our hearts. And being able to have a chance at impacting how kids are exposed to computer science for the first time was a pretty thrilling concept. So it's what led us to go and do it.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like it was worth it for you. At least that's
Yeah,
what I'm gathering.
yeah, it was a super valuable. I felt like I learned so. I mean, I've had the privilege of feeling like in the last 5, 6, 7 years, however many years, um, I can't think back to a time where I'm like, I'm not being challenged enough, I'm not growing. There's just been new opportunities and new chances to grow and learn and expand my experiences and my skill set. So, and this was like a big part of that too.
Yeah, I'm sure it's expanded your skill set a lot. So early on, what kind of challenges did you and the team face that you pretty much had to learn on your own?
Oh man. I mean, there are some nuts and bolts things, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with,
Yeah.
but just like setting up a company for the very first time, right? And setting things up so that There aren't a lot of things that tell you right up front, here's the exact checklist, because all the conditions are kind of different depending on what state you're in,
Mm-hmm.
where all of your, where's your team situated, what kind of a industry, like what kind of a business are you running, so on and so forth. And we wanted to set things up in the right way. There's also a lot of, just going on the fundraising journey is something that takes a lot of uh, mental preparation. And there's a lot of, I mean, when it comes to running your own business, again, I know you're experiencing this too. There aren't a lot of like, this is definitely the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of like, you could do this, or you could do that, or you could do this, or you could do that. And it's all trade offs, right? And so navigating through the ambiguity and all the nuance that comes along with it, um, I kind of felt like for the year that I was on the entrepreneurial journey, the biggest thing was the mental game more than anything else. Like the actual things that I was going and doing were not necessarily harder
Mm-hmm.
than anything that I've done before. Some of them were new things, but they weren't harder or more complex. It was just more that there there is the mental game of you don't have a safety net. You don't have somebody else who's going to take care of this for you. And that's both a very exciting thing, but also can be a very like draining thing too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely understand that.
Yeah. I think the thing that helped us so much was because we were able to have really frank conversations with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And we spoke very like we talked often about what are our priorities, are we on the same page about these kinds of things, and like getting that values alignment and priorities alignment discussed early, and then you check in on it on a very frequent basis. That was the best way for us to be able to make sure that our team was still healthy and happy and feeling the right kind of challenge.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to have the right team with you, to have the people that you trust and that will make sure that you're essentially taking care of each other during that time period.
Yeah, we were really lucky in that regard. We had a team of seven, and every person had, I was the newest person in the mix
Mm-hmm.
for our full time folks. And you know, I'd worked with Chris for 5, 6 years, and I'd known who Ross was. For everybody else on the team, this was their like minimum second time, in several cases, fourth time working together over the course of 10 to 25 years.
Wow, wow, that's
It was basically a bringing the band back together moment for a lot of the
yeah,
folks. And so, it's like you don't have to do a lot as much of the like, so who are you and how do you operate and how do I get to know, what style and what kind of communicator you are, what kind of person are you? Like just already had to. Everyone already knew that and had a lot of that existing history, and that helped us get things started off much more quickly and with lower friction.
yeah. That makes a lot of sense. You just can kind of hit the ground running, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so uh, so bot school, tell us about it. Tell us what bot school's journey was.
Yeah, so it was a crazy time last year. We kind of made things official at the company in August. And then we knew that we wanted to be part of the Hour of Code, which
Mm-hmm.
is a week long, like it's basically a moment in time in December where code.org, which is great organization that is part of a network of different organizations that promote computer science education. Basically, during Computer Science Education Week in early December, they host like an annual Hour of Code event. And so, in order to be able to participate, we needed to have the first kind of like a vertical slice of our game
Mm-hmm.
ready for them at the start of October for them to evaluate whether or not we should be part of the program. So basically, we I think we started the company in August. We got everybody on board by the beginning of September, and then 4 weeks later, we had shipped a vertical slice that could be shared with the committee there. We got accepted into the program in November, and then did the final kind of like, first time user experience, tutorial system, story refinements, level refinements, artwork, animation, sound refinements, and then all the marketing materials. And because we had to have a guide on the website that was hosting the game to talk through, like, how do you walk maybe a teacher or a classroom who has no knowledge of how to play games, how to make this as simple for them as possible, and what do they do if they run into trouble. So there's a lot of development of those kinds of guides and things like that. All of that happened in this mad dash in November, and start of December was when everything went live. And so it was just like it was a really crazy but very awesome experience to just kind of have, there wasn't a game, and then there was a game, and then there were kids playing it, and we were getting feedback from teachers, and we were having kids write in, and so that was all very, very cool. So that was the first quarter of us being a business.
That's insane.
Yeah, it was crazy. And at the same time, we went on, we explored the venture capital path, and we talked with a lot of really great people. And at the end of it, we raised the friends and family, which helped us be able to deliver the initial game. And then after that point, we ultimately did not find a deal that we thought was the right fit for what would have been best for the game, the studio, and the team, and what we were trying to accomplish. And so that's when we started to do some contract work so that we could self-fund. And that's when we started working with Phoenix. And we several of us had worked with the co-founders at Phoenix before from our time at Riot, and big fans of that team already, and we liked Dauntless. Like, I think Chris was one of the founders. He had purchased the founder pack in Dauntless way back in the open beta days, and so we knew the team there, and we ended up having some of our team help with the platform engineering, and realized that we really like working together. And as time kind of went on, after Dauntless's launch across consoles this May, the conversation came up of like, well, should we just have your team join our team and we can all continue to work together? And so that's kind of how that evolved. And it's a super unexpected, but at the same time very exciting, at the same time like whirlwind of a year.
Yeah.
To kind of be where we were last year, and where we are now. But now we're all at Phoenix now, and I still get to work with some to most of my team at Bot School, and that's been really great.
That's awesome. I mean, that's quite the journey, especially just in a year's time. That just seems crazy, just where you went from one August to the next.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy reflecting back at the start of this August. Like, that was only a year ago, So, but yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're getting to work together on a game that we believe in with a team that we really enjoy working with, and so it's all good. It's all really great.
Yeah. So the unexpected turned out to work out for you. That's for sure. So during your time as an entrepreneur, if there were say another independent studio out there What kind of advice would you give them?
Oh man. Well, it depends on where they are in their life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have different pieces of advice. I do think that one of the things I found most useful was developing a network of other founders because, even though you might be working on very different types of products,
Mm-hmm.
something about having that camaraderie and other folks who understand or have had similar journeys, to just bounce ideas off of, to kind of be each other's support group. That was really helpful. Um, I think another thing too is just, what really helped us and helped me personally was having the conversations early and often with my co-founders on what were our true priorities and how do we get aligned on like what are we going to, I mean, for instance, for us, like we knew that prioritizing being able to keep our team intact was
Mm-hmm.
actually our number one priority, and that's not going to be the priority for everyone. I mean, I think if you think about what is the mission you're trying to go after, um, what is the product you're trying to build, and who is on your team. I mean, in most cases, you're going to be like, well, all three of those things are important, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you kind of have to stack rank them. Like, if we had to choose, what is the most important thing? Is it keeping the team intact? Is it pursuing this particular mission? Is it building this particular product? And having clarity around that conversation and like continuing to come back to it and making sure that we're on the same page and having those honest conversations made every single decision easier, even though the the path of being an entrepreneur is just very complex and hard, right? Because there's no right
Yeah.
answers. There's just your your uh, your best attempt at having a good answer with the information that you have in hand. And so much of it is if you don't have those kinds of honest conversations, it makes it so much harder because you have to make a real trade-off sometimes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, Figuring out your priorities and being honest with your team.
Yeah. Yep. I think also there are a lot of frameworks and tools and advice out there, and it was great to be able to learn and absorb all those things in the same way that it was really great to learn and absorb as much as we could from our friends who are in the industry,
Mm-hmm.
other founders, advisors, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, being able to distill down all of that and think about what is really applicable for you and the situation that you're you're handling, right? Because it's not a rote exercise to go and found a company and make it successful.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different factors. There's a lot of things around luck. There's a lot of things around timing. Sure, I guess the two things are related to one another. And so like thinking about what are you trying to accomplish and then like the different forces that are at play and then trying to just make the best decision that you can and being real about was that the correct decision or not, and then just continuing to get new information so that you can adjust your strategy going forward. Like it's kind of like iterative development, but
Mm-hmm.
placed on on just general decision making for the company, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's definitely part of the point of doing this podcast in particular is trying to get as much information from other people as possible. At least when we do interviews like this. So
That's really cool.
that way we can better inform our decisions, even if it's not always applicable to our situation.
Yeah, and I think when you talk with others, more often than not, you at least get to build a sense of camaraderie
Mm-hmm.
with other folks who've gone through some similar situations, and it was you know great to know from a lot of folks like in most cases, nobody has the right answer
Yeah.
because so much, or like, I actually generally was more suspicious when someone was like, "Oh yeah, this is exactly how we got this done." I'm like, I think it's going to be a little bit of luck and a little bit of skill and like what you do with the opportunities that are handed to you. But I mean, everybody has questions and fears and goes through unpredictable things in the founding journey. And knowing that that was the case was, at least for me, a very comforting thing. It's like, oh, it's not just us that's
Yeah.
experienced this like thing that we don't know how to handle. This is a hard thing to go and do, right? Um, and it takes bravery and it takes a lot of willing to put your ego on hold for a bit, just to
Mm.
ask for advice, ask for help, recognize when you're wrong about the way that you're approaching something, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, we're all just figuring it out.
Yeah,
Well,
it's fun though.
yeah, I will agree with that. I love what we're doing right now. So, um, Jing, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast this week. It was awesome to have you here. If
Thank you for inviting me.
it was my pleasure. And if anybody else wanted to know about you or contact you, um, if you want them to, where could they find you?
I have a Twitter account that I use sporadically. It's at Jing of all trades. It's probably the easiest way to just like find me on the internet, I guess.
All right, awesome. Once again, thank you. I appreciate you being on, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.